Hello and good afternoon, everybody. And Tá Fáilte, you're all very, very welcome to Ireland House. It's great to be here, and it's a really special occasion for us. Ireland House my name is John Concannon. I'm here to do the best job of the whole week to introduce this panel. This panel is even better than the real thing. But first of all, before we introduce the panel, we just want to thank everybody for coming here, because there's so much stuff on in South by this week. So I just want to ask yourselves to give yourselves a round of applause for showing up here today. We really, really appreciate it. So what we're trying to do in Ireland House, and in case you haven't seen all the branding in Ireland House, we're in here. It's all of the different parts of Ireland coming together: our music, our creative industries, our film. We've had some fabulous panels, and we want to really talk about Ireland as a great place to do creative work and to come from all of the work we do in the whole creative industries. So when we were putting this idea together, we had the thought, well, wouldn't it be great if the guys from U2 could tell us their story about what just happened in the Sphere. Hands up who's at the Sphere, by the way. Okay, yeah, very good. Very jealous. I haven't been there, but I am a huge fan. But it's 40 nights in the desert, sold out show, 700,000 people. And for those lucky people who've been at the Sphere, will attest to how innovative it was. It literally off the charts on innovation. So I think not just in terms of Ireland, we are so immensely proud of the work of U2. They're an incredible band, incredible creativity for so many years, so many albums, so many tours, and they just do so much great work around the world. They were very much part of our campaign at the UN Security Council. We're very supportive of that as well, and just hugely patriotic people from Ireland. So when we asked U2, would you come and tell the story, they said, we're going to not just tell the story, this is an incredible lineup of people that we're going to introduce you to here that have flown in especially for this particular special event. The people behind the Sphere, if you like, the Wizard of Oz curtain is going to be pulled back, and to tell the story that's never been told before, in a way we've never seen before. So this is a world exclusive, never to be seen again, so everybody, we're really lucky to be here. So the first person on our panel, if I can introduce, is Mr. Rick Lipton. He has come in from London. He is stage design and creative director of the Sphere. Rick, come on up. Rick will tell you his story himself, but he has worked with the world's, as all of our band have, all of our team have worked with the world's top artists. Next up, we have, who's just flown in last night from LA, and the live video director. I mean, it is one big video show. And Stefan Smasher Desmond, come on up, Smasher, let's do it. And I mean, it's at the end of the day, as everyone who loves music knows, it's all the sound and the design, the creativity, but it's nothing without brilliant sound. And we are just absolutely delighted that the sound engineer, the absolutely enormously talented Niall Slevin, has flown in from Ireland to be here today. Niall, come on up on stage. So these three fantastic individuals are going to tell us the story, as it says, of U2, Achtung Baby, live at the Sphere. But just to give it a sense of, these guys have been working with U2 collectively for 84 years. So if anything, all of the stories some of which will remain untold, some will may be told. And our panel today will be moderated by a fantastic part of Team Ireland, Ireland's cultural attaché to the West Coast, based in LA, Siofra Quinlan. And we've had a big week in LA, aside from our panel here. Anybody know what happened Sunday night? The Oscars. How many Oscars did Ireland win? Five. Yes, five. Brilliant. Big round of applause for Killian and all the Oscar team. So, as part of her job, Siofra works with Stephen Davenport, the brilliant person from Screen Ireland. But Siofra is our cultural attaché, and Siofra is going to take us through the journey with these brilliant people. Siofra Quinlan, bring it on!
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for joining us here today at Ireland House at South by Southwest, as we explore the triumph of the melding of creative and technological worlds to create the unparalleled show U2 UV Achtung Baby live at the Sphere. U2 are the first band to launch and light up the Sphere at the Venetian in Las Vegas, a dome-shaped venue like no other, lined with LED screens, offering the artist a tantalizing playground of possibilities to flex their craft and connect with their audience. U2UV has been met with critical acclaim, described by Rolling Stone as a quantum leap forward for concerts, by Variety as the greatest show on earth, and by The Guardian as an utterly astonishing, admirably raw Vegas extravaganza. And while spectacular, the show is more than just spectacle. It is a true marriage between art and science. It is a radical act of optimism, taking the concert goer on an existential roller coaster towards a post-humanist other world. Today, as John says, we will glimpse behind the curtain of The Wizard of Oz to see where this journey first began, as we welcome some of the masterminds of U2UV to Ireland House. Please give a warm Céad Míle Fáilte, so not one, but 100,000 welcomes to Rick, Stefan, Smasher, and Niall Slemon. Enormous congratulations on the residency that wrapped earlier this month, and thank you for joining us here today. For those that do have a little bit of FOMO and couldn't make it to the Sphere, fear not. We're about to transport you to Vegas. Delving into U2UV, we'd love to learn a little bit about you guys and your respective crafts. So Smasher, as a live video director, integral to the development of the first LED screen ever used in U2's Pop Mart tour in 1997, and integral also to the development of the Sphere show 26 years later. How did your craft first become intertwined with U2, and how did us Irish folks become so lucky to work with such a fantastic Belgian fella?
Oh, that's nice. No, I was working for a very tiny company back in, just a little bit outside Bruges, and we were kind of developing our own technology. There's another company there that's quite big in video, Barco, and we were collaborating on this new tech, and it allowed to make these big screens, and that was deployed on Zoo TV. It was a famous store back in 1992, and yeah, that's what they needed, a fella to come with them, and I jumped on a bus, a touring bus, and came with them, and I'm still there 31 years later. Yeah, I'm still part of pushing technology, but because that's what we do, that's what we love the most, is pushing new boundaries, and you know, it never stops with them. The next thing was the LED screen. The blue LED was invented in 1996 or 95 by a Japanese fella, and yeah, we made a video screen out of it, and then the next thing, it just kept coming and kept coming. So I really, I've been enjoying this ride forever. You know, I've tried to retire in 2018, so they called me back for this one.
Well, you're not so good at retiring, but very good at everything else. Niall, so as an audio monitor and wireless systems engineer of the show, do you tell us a little bit about your journey in working on U2's live sound world, and where did it first begin?
Well, I suppose realistically, out of anyone you've ever met, I was the one who was going to stay in Ireland and never move out of it. So I grew up in the 80s. There was very little work, and I was determined to live in Ireland. So I studied engineering and physics, two of the most boring subjects. But at night, get some money, to buy the odd pint of Guinness or whatever. I used to work in a music shop. And as I was kind of getting close to the end of my training as an engineer, I used to get kind of valve guitar amps brought in because I was kind of good at it. Myself and my father spent a lot of time playing with valve radios and TVs and amps. And I fixed the guitar amp. And then I was asked would I go on tour. So I thought, 3 months around Europe, pre-holiday, come back and work in Intel or Ericsson's. And then 36 years later, I don't think they kept the job for me. But yeah, so it was accidental, but would I be able to do anything else? I'm not sure. I'd have the same passion for it. And you have to be driven by passion for this because it makes no sense. So you have to have a passion, you have to have a hunger, and you have to have a love for it. So.
Absolutely, a roller coaster of a journey, much like the show itself. So Rick, in your work with Stuffish and as a stage designer and creative consultant to U2, Beyonce, Madonna, and many more, what exactly does an entertainment architect do in bringing a show to life?
That's a good question. So my background came through theatre. So as a young boy, I did theatre and DJing, weirdly. But I, like these guys, had an obsession with equipment as well. And so I started building sets and understanding how to make shows through school and then university. And I went and actually studied architecture. I don't know why, someone said it was a good idea. I wanted to be a theatre designer, but I'd done a lot of theatre design as a student. So I came to London, started studying architecture, found out about this guy, Mark Fisher, who was a set designer that had done U2 and Rolling Stones and other people. And I was like, well, he's an architect, but he's designing shows. And what I realized quite quickly is that bands like U2, who were working with these kind of guys, building theatrical events, but at a scale that is essentially moving a city around the world, is essentially architecture. So we define this term entertainment architecture, which is trying to say that a building that is a theatre or is cinema or an experience, that they're all places that fundamentally capture event, time, lighting, sound, people, and of course immersive experiences. And places like the Sphere are sort of the next generation of entertainment architecture. They are places created for event, whereas a sports arena is for sports, but we put shows in. So as entertainment architects at Stuffish, which is Studio Fisher, it's a sort of link to Mark, who was the original founder, we most of us are designers as architects. We do everything from buildings to shows. We did the Abbey Theatre in London, which is a sort of another kind of new kind of venue. And it's this way of blending the two. So yeah, I managed to get there, and then I met Mark, and then we did U2, and now we're still doing U2 12 years later, or whatever it is.
Fascinating, and the Sphere wasn't fully built as the show was beginning to be imagined. So we're going to begin at the beginning today, and rewind to the very first steps of when the show planted seeds in your minds and began to grow. So I believe it started in France. Is that correct?
Yeah.
With a glass of wine or two, just to get the journey off to a good start. So where is this exactly?
This is a place called Chateau Lacoste, which is near Nice, and we went there to sort of, every time we start a U2 project, we start with a meeting with most of the creative team, which is quite a large team, and we sit around a table and we look at things and we talk about things and we just sketch and we talk about, if it's based on a new album or if it's based on a specific album or a new thing. And so we start to do this process and we sit around and by the end of that weekend, normally we have a vague idea of what we're going to do. Vague. And then we go away. So you're going to say what this is.
Yeah, so tell us what this is here.
So then what happens is we go away and this sort of beats of the show, and because we didn't know what this venue is, we'd never been in it, but we understood it as this sort of large scale thing, and so these are some of Es Devlin's paintings, who's another one of the creative team. And so we had these ideas of, can we split the screen and sort of see the light pouring out of it, or the vertical, and you'll see like the very sort of early things that became the cross at the beginning of the show, which you see, or the flags of John Gerard are sort of featured in here, and ideas of sort of Vegas and the sort of animals at the end. So we started with very loose creative ideas at first.
So this is the first map as such.
Sort of, yeah.
And so when you're sitting around that table drinking beautiful French wine and deciding, also which, what record are you going to play? So the show spotlights one album, Achtung Baby, recorded in Berlin following the fall of the Berlin Wall, released in 1991. The record is described as a voyage into the postmodern, a brave venture into unknown territory. So was it clear from the beginning that it had to be this record, and was it rooted in Zoo TV?
It was, yeah, and it was a risk as well, because if you would, if the album, I mean, it was a successful album. It had a lot of big hits on there, but I think it's we at this point you guys were still touching in the dark. I mean, it was we didn't know what that canvas was going to be. All we knew it was a big LED screen, but nobody had seen it. So the normal procedure would not be that. He would design something, and we have full control of what the design is. Like if you toured in the stadium and an arena, and immediately saying that's the album we're going to play because of the celebration. That was a big risk. If you think about it, we didn't know what to expect there.
Yeah, to that point, Willie Williams, who's the sort of creative director that's been with U2 forever, making these shows, was very cautious at first because, as Smasher said, the design of the show has always been, how do we support a big video screen or video screens? How do we support the lights, and how do we support the speakers? And so that's been the sort of thing that's driven the design and the purpose of the design. And whilst we all love technology, it's not just technology for the sake of it, it's technology to tell a story. And U2 want to tell that story, and they want to break the fourth wall between them and the audience. So all of the shows up to the Sphere went to do that, and then suddenly we were presented with the tool that we didn't design. Here is this big sphere with the speakers built in, and the screen, and some places for some lights. And then it's like, what do you want to do in there? And that's where we started to sort of behave cunningly. So we started to sort of see how we could break the Sphere, not in a bad way, but in a creative way.
So it's a pretty ginormous place, huh?
It's really big. It's about 300-foot diameter inside. There's two spheres, so if you've seen it from the outside, that's about a 380-foot sphere with a 300-foot sphere inside it.
And so this is probably triggering for you guys. This is the first time you've seen the Sphere since you've been let out of it.
What's interesting about this is, so you see this is the internal structure, and all these grey boxes is where the speakers go, behind the screen. You can see them sort of just here, behind the proscenium on the right, and then these sort of clusters, which I will talk about a bit more. And on the right here, there was all these red dots of things that we could potentially lift things through the screen. We only do it with one thing in the end. There's a huge amount of infrastructure in the building that we didn't use yet.
So lift things through the screen, what does that
mean? So you can open the little hat. There's a moment in the show where Bono holds a big balloon. It's this 150, 200-foot long rope that drops out of the sky, and we put a balloon on the screen. So we open these little hatches in the screen, and then we lift things up through it. So at the beginning, we didn't know how much we wanted to do. So we got these drawings. We'd never been in the Sphere. We sort of thought we understood what it was. We put a VR headset on, but we didn't really know what the emotion of being in that space would be, right? And so inevitably, you start just trying to, what we call like an initial sketch was like, okay, well, what happens if we did it more traditionally U2, where it would be sort of a stage with a big passerelle, catwalk around the edge, and should the band, there's a way of taking our part of the screen, so should we take a bit out and stick the stage partly in the screen and partly out the screen? which might have been a good idea, but we didn't do that in the end. And then we turned up with this empty room, which Smashing can tell us more about.
Yeah, so the first time I walked in there to look at the screen, there was no screen. I really thought. Very transparent, but there was nothing. If you look here, that was the only thing that was there. There was the 4 panels. We're in November. We were supposed to come in there in June, July to start rehearsals. So you can imagine everybody was really worried about things, and there was rumors going on that you're not going to make it. You know, they're going to have to postpone. There was a lot of bad vibes going on even in press. You can only imagine, you know, that these pictures were released in press as well. Like people, you know, leaked those pictures. So yeah, that was like my first biggest worry was like, how are we going to drive this screen? But I had no idea, like, how are we going to put technology in that do the visuals? And then more importantly for him as well, like the audio bit of it was, that video was challenging, but audio was equally as challenging as video, and he can tell you about it, I think.
So now tell us what you're seeing in this photo.
I didn't actually see that. For me, the journey started trying to pronounce sphere. Took me a while to get that together. But Joe Hurley is the sound director, the audio director, and he did visit the venue at that stage. He had visited previously when it was very much a work in progress, before the speakers were beginning to get into place. But when he visited that, it was really to get the context of where the speakers will be compared to where the audience will be. So he could actually start mapping a sound grid, because it's a very complex sound system. It does some extraordinary things. You know, like if you go back to when Elvis started, but he used to arrive in a van, go up to the local hi-fi shop and rent as many big speakers and amplifiers as he could and do a gig. And then you had the Beatles in Shea Stadium in 1965, and they had, I think it was 10 columns of speakers of 175 watts each. Then, you know, during the 70s and 80s, they started putting all these speakers into one cabinet, so they could fly them, focus them, and, you know, developed it from there. And then in the 90s, you had single source arrays, which I bring up because they did start getting clever at that point, where the problem with sound is, unless it's focused, if you're hitting sound going, if it's hitting anywhere where there's no people, it's a waste of energy. And if you waste that energy, you're missing it somewhere else. So the line array system helped focus the sound and bring it further. Now there is a natural, you know, the laws of physics could take that when you go further away from the speaker, the sound gets lower. You know, that's can't avoid it. But those laws have been rewritten when you look at the holoplat system. Mainly because if you look around this room, one cabinet can have 4 zones. They call it 3D mapping or 3D zoning. So you could have 4 zones from one set of speakers. And if you had someone that was translating what I was saying, people over there would hear French, Spanish, German, or English, the Irish, say, you know, whatever. But you can actually pinpoint the sound to such a degree and to such a precise area that rewrites the rule book. So the problem with that is, as wonderful as it is, it's very hard to get your head around how to mix it, because conventional PAs, there's a heap of them over there, there's a heap of them over there, there's a few behind you, and there's a left and right mix. This had such a variety of possibilities that you had to learn how to rewrite the way Joe was doing it. So it took a good few visits and a good few demos. The first demo was in, I think, 2021. And Bono talked to Joe and said, look, we're going to have a listen to this system. It's going to be in the Sphere and we want to check it out. Now, technically, the way you two check out something is they try to break it. And there's a good few success stories about how that was done. But Joe headed over to Leipzig, and it was quite a big arena-sized system there. And he brought with him some hard drives from bought various venues. A really horrendous stadium, a really good stadium, an arena, and then one in the middle. And he played tracks back. So it was the closest you're going to get to actually a band playing. And he also brought a microphone, because the nemesis of any front of house engineer is feedback. When the artist stands in front of a wedge or in front of a stack of speakers. And he brought that mic and he brought it right up to the speaker, and it didn't feed back. So he knew he had something that was incredible. Then he turned up the volume, and the volume went louder and louder, and then all the Holoplats crew ran and hid. I said, "You can't be doing that. That's too loud. You can't be doing that." He goes, "Well, it's a live rock and roll band." And he turned it up, and he didn't break it. So that was the first impression that Joe had of it. The next phase was to actually look at how we can use the technology within the speaker system to benefit. And the next process was he went over to Lidditz in Pennsylvania with a mock-up of the system. Now he had previously gone and looked at a mini-me of the Sphere in Burbank, but there was no sound system in it, so he got access to a small studio with a simulated version of it. But then he went to Lidditz in Pennsylvania and had a full mock-up of it, not physical in size, but in all the dynamics and where the speakers were going to be. And he mixed on that for a few days, and he walked away with an idea of how you can bring the sound and run them through these speakers. It was a primitive idea at that point, but it was an idea. And then the next step was rehearsals in Dublin. And those rehearsals were the first time that those speaker systems, it wasn't laid out as will be in the venue. It was just laid out 4 speakers there and 4 speakers there. But it was the first time he had live inputs. And those inputs gave me a chance to really judge how the system would work with live inputs. It doesn't matter how accurate the recordings are, they're not live inputs. They don't have the background noise, they don't have the handling noise. It's kind of almost like mixing in a studio, but when you're out live and you've got live microphones, then the possibility of other influences coming in, rumble, background noise, come into play. It was also the first time that the band had a full monitor system in rehearsals with this new speaker system. So it was very beneficial in finding out how much background noise was going to come from the back of the speakers, whether it was low end or high end feedback. And it passed with flying colours. And then the next stage was it headed over to France. And band rehearsals, kind of real band rehearsals. The advantage about that one was he had a studio next door to where the band were rehearsing with a mock-up, a more accurate mock-up of the system. So the band would rehearse during the day, Joe would get the files from the recording, move into the other studio, and there with some Holoplats guys, they actually started working out how to get a concert sound, because the PA hadn't been used in a lot of concerts. It had been set up in the Beacon Theatre in New York, and a couple of travelling rock bands went in there, but not really a U2 sort of dynamic guitar, drums, bass, and then vocal. So they got the opportunity to put everything in the space that they wanted. And then the next step was the Sphere.
That was August, by the way, that you were talking about. We're already August. So the show was September 29th, and what you're talking about, that first time, like in Nice, that was August, like a month before, because in July and August, yeah. In all fairness, there wasn't that many rehearsal time at the Sphere itself. We didn't get the band till, the second week of September?
In the Sphere. Yeah, you'll see some pictures later where at the same time, we explained, we were in Vegas building the show, and in Nice rehearsing the show, and I was going between the two.
Makes total sense.
2 days in
Typical
Nice,
U2,
2 days in Vegas, and we were sort of reacting between the two things we were finding at the same time. Got some pictures later.
So you're like really imagining into the unknown here, and as we've seen, the Sphere was not ready. So as you're imagining how this sound world is working, so Rick, you're building this visual world, right? So can you talk us through?
So there's a huge team of people outside of the core team, but once we've got this sort of idea of the story, we know what the order of the songs are going to be, we know we want to start in this concrete cave, because it was sort of like cave paintings. The first time people told stories and listened to music was in caves. And then, you know, this was end of the world, and we knew that there'd be these moments, and so we do these very initial storyboards. These were done by Treatment. This is some initial ideas of the words for Fly, and so they draw these out, and then at the same time, my team are working on the drawings of the stage, which at the same time we're now speaking to Smasher and saying, we want to make a circular LED screen floor, Smasher, can we build that in time? To which Smasher's going, no. And so whilst the stage might look quite simple, as this sort of Brian Eno record player-esque design, a lot of the times when you do circular video screens, you take a square tile like this and you put a border over it to hide the fact that it's not really circular, but we wouldn't accept that. So Smasher had this guy that makes, you know, custom LED tiles. And so we're very late in the day, we were like, hey, we need one of those LED floors and bend the LED for the edges. So that was something.
We had to put speakers,
and we had to put speakers behind this thing, and there's some more pitch there. So. But yeah, all these beautiful drawings are the first iterations of thinking about, from the content guys of Treatment, how this would work and working with the thing. One thing that's really important to say is, you know, there's a word that we all use in this industry called, begins with a C, it's a really awkward word called content. And the world is saturated by content. But the band and the creative team were very clear that this wasn't going to be a show about content, it was going to be a show about art. And that the canvas, this largest canvas ever created for digital art, would engage with artists who would then curate pieces. So the Vegas piece was done by ILM, who makes Star Wars and things. You know, the Marco Brown beer was the beautiful Vegas thing, and there's other things. You know, there's John Gerard. So this is some of the original sketches of the stage, showing it as the record player.
And this is the Brian Eno record player.
This is the Brian Eno record player, and the Brian Eno record player is obviously Brian Eno is hugely influential in the band. He has these beautiful illuminated record players that Bono has one of in his kitchen, and you mentioned earlier about, you know, wanting to do Achtung Baby, but the other part of that was that they also wanted to capture songs of Surrender, which is the new album that was sort of 40 years of 40 tracks that have been remixed, and so the serenity of colour light and just being bathed in. The beauty of U2 is the ability to switch things off as well as switch everything on. So we knew that as part of the show, you'd want to hit everybody over the head with Achtung Baby, but then like turn everything off and just be bathed in light. And so this is sort of an example of that.
So tell us a little bit more about the ins and outs of that, because the show, like, it oscillates between like sheer euphoria to intense intimacy. So how do you map that sort of organic, raw feeling the whole way through the show? So Smasher, you mentioned something about time codes and the lack of time codes.
Oh, we don't play time code with this band. The time code, like if you go see many bands now these days, they just the clock starts. There's a guy there underneath the stage with a computer. He starts the show. Time coder's running. The lights are perfectly in time. The video, the all goes perfectly in time. Beautiful synchronized swimming pool, but that's not what we're into, because that's, you know, it's Bono. He's going to try to save the planet in the middle of the sun. He's going to give a 10-minute speech at the bar at that point for a pint, because we know that can go along. The record is 14 minutes when he gave his speech. But which means you have to go for a organic workflow, so which means all lights and video has to be triggered manually. You can't just like rely on a trigger from. I mean, there is Pro Tools, there are certain things behind the stage happening, but we're not driven by any clock or whatever. So yeah, it's very organic, the whole thing, and that's what makes it so fascinating. Is like working with them. You know, you never know. Like, you know, but in terms of you know, the show built itself, we kind of held off. It was really good to have that middle part in there, just to hold off on that whole. I mean, you've been bombarding your synapses like for the first half hour. You're like, you don't know what's happening. People are. I mean, I've seen people falling over. There was a lot of puking because the size of it. You don't. I mean, you don't. If you're sensitive to that kind of stuff, you know. So first half hour was full on. We didn't hold back, but then I mean, even programming this, myself and my son were day and night programming these visuals in there, and it was, for me, like driving back home. We were both like early in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. You drive for a little nap, and yeah, it's hard. So we felt like, okay, you have to have a break here, a visual break, and that's where that record player was just the Brian Eno stuff, like was just Songs of Surrender. It was called Achtung. Was just perfect for that, like let your brain. And then we started what Bonus said, we're gonna wake the baby back up, and we kicked it all off again. But it was very necessary to have that pause in there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Niall, you said two things that I can't stop thinking about. One, creating this kind of a show is a bit like cycling a bike up the River Liffey. And two, that video in such a live setting can't quite be 3D, but it's the sound that adds this third dimension. Could you tell us a little bit more about, you mentioned that you're mixing more with place as opposed to levels to create intimacy.
The Holoplast system has two kind of dynamic properties. One of them is the 3D, mapping out the 3D. I think it's kind of an ability to put a sound in a certain area very precisely. But then you also have this thing called waveform synthesis, which you can take a virtual sound and move it anywhere. So to give you an example, you could have 4 sections here with different languages that they wouldn't actually hear. The French seats wouldn't hear the Spanish, the German, whatever. But you could also actually put a virtual whisper in each one of those people's ears. So they're sitting there, they're listening to a mix, and yet they hear someone go, "Hey, down here." So it's a very clever. Now it's kind of, you could say it's psychological warfare, because you can give messages to people while they're looking at something else. But the benefit of it is you can place almost anything anywhere. So if you can imagine, we're used to a big left speaker, a big right speaker, guitar solo, bring the guitar level up a little bit. You're mixing with level at that point. But with this system, you can actually, if Edge is going into a solo, you can actually move it over there a little bit, and it really becomes crystal clear because it's definitive in that position. And you can move it over there if you want. And there's a couple of examples. One of them is when Streets. There's a kind of organ sound at the beginning of Streets, and it started from way up behind everyone, and it crawled down, climbed down the back, and landed on the stage just as Edge went into the guitar piece. So that was where 3D aspect of the sound came into play. Now there's various examples of it throughout the show, but it really can be precise. And it's like walking through a forest where you hear a bird over there, or you hear, a rustle of trees over there. That can actually be put into someone almost on an individual basis. So to take advantage of that takes a bit of time, takes a bit of getting used to, because you've done something a certain way for years and years and years. You've been delivering great music in a milk truck, and then suddenly you're delivering great music in a Rolls Royce. And it just takes a while to get that, just to learn how to do it, to get the feel of it, and I think Joe's policy was, we'll try it, if it sounds better, we'll keep it, if it sounds as good or not as good, we did bin it. So it was such a learning curve that you couldn't really, the theory wasn't in any book. You had to feel it and you had to mix it, and suddenly you have this 3D, almost like a studio sound, that if you've got, you need to have the ability to say no to stuff, because it can overtake everything you want to do. And I think that's where the Joe O's magic came in, where he didn't let it control him, he controlled it. And I think at the end of the day, that was very successful. But that's what I mean by 3D. You could almost have, a guitar solo from any position without taking from the mix, because they did have 4 columns going down the proscenium, which is back, kind of going back to the stage, so the band were in front of them, and they were all stereo mixes. But then you could actually infuse or place anything you wanted So if Bono was whispering or not singing a soft song, you can actually make that as dynamic without being louder. Or if he was giving it full whack, you could make that dynamic without having to pull it back. So like it's a learning curve, you know, it's practice, but and it will be something that people will come to terms with in the future, you know. But it's an interesting, and it's unlimited what you can do with it. You know, it's scary actually. You know.
Astonishing and mind-blowing, and must feel like, you know, like donning a superpower cape all of a sudden and having all these extra
It's
powers.
also you can't see the speakers, so
They're entirely invisible, right?
yeah. The best audio processor ever made is in between your ears. So when you see a speaker, you kind of automatically, oh yeah, it's going to be a load of sound coming from there and there and along the floor. But when you don't see it, it becomes kind of, you know, you have to listen for it, and that's where the fun starts.
So the interesting thing about that as well is that the room is designed to give sound. You know, usually people aren't in front of the speakers, but you try and design people to be behind speakers usually, and of course everything was in front of the speakers, but we were therefore in front of the mix for the way the room had been designed. So as Smash said earlier, we then had to build extra. It didn't matter there was 1,800 speakers already in the room. We had to build another 50 or so into the stage so that we could position that sound also for the people on the floor, because otherwise they would have been hearing sound that should have been over here, coming from over here. So it wasn't just like a normal fun-filled kind of conversation. There was a whole holoplot system just built into the stage, behind the screens, up the floor, and everything else as well.
Sheer invisible magic. So February 23. So what's happening now? Are you in the venue yet?
No.
Still dreaming.
Well, no, now.
So what's this?
So what people don't probably know is that they have two spheres. Actually, they have three, technically. So they have a 100% sphere in Vegas, they have a 25% sphere in Burbank, and they have a 10% sphere, which has been their way of proving to people that it's going to work. The problem is you can't shrink people. So even if you're inside. So what this on the right is the resolution with the thumb. That's the 10% sphere resolution, which is roughly the same resolution probably as this screen, about 2 or 3 millimeters. And this is the blow-through screen of the sphere, which is the 8 millimeter blow-through, which has got all the speakers behind. So as a set designer, I spent my life trying to convince sound people to put speakers behind screens so we don't have to see them, and they've never ever wanted to do it. And then of course now there's 1,800 behind this screen. So this is us coming in February, and being in the quarter-size sphere, looking at bits of content that either we had made or that the sphere had sort of had, just to sort of see what started to work. So what you can see with the lines on here is how the curvature of the room affects the skew of things, and there's a platform in this sort of 25% sphere that you can stand on, which is sort of as if you were in the best box of the building. And whilst acoustic, you can see the people here. So this is some of us sort of looking up and seeing bits of footage that they had created. And as I say, while it's not perfectly brilliant because we're not a quarter of the scale, you start to see things. This was us just telling them to switch the screen on in blue, which then of course led to the Brian Eno stuff. This is the initial ideas of the cross, of light, the concrete, and just behind Smash is the first iteration of John Gerard's flag. And we built an LED floor a quarter of the size, so we could see the relationship between the band and the thing. And this is Smash's first samples of the curved LED screen floor and the curved tiles that we put around the edge of the. So in February, we're starting to sort of prove that some of the things we've been thinking about can be done by being in the little sphere. And then stage height and speakers understage, like how high should this stage be? So it's, you know, the room, normally in an arena, you're used to sort of focusing people's attention this way, but in the sphere, you know, they're really up here. So how high should the stage be? Do you want to make it feel really good for the people? You want to make sure that the band feel silhouetted against the screen, but you want people on the floor to still feel that they're a live gig, but we also had to put all these speakers underneath. And then it smashes. We went into the sphere then in May, and they're still fixing the screen and making it work, but we wanted the band to understand how it would feel to be on the stage, that we'd picked the decision of in February. So there's a little platform just on the floor there, and then this is Smasher standing on it. And we went around the sphere to look down to see how it would feel as an audience member looking at the stage and as the stage member looking at the audience.
Okay, so you're in, the venue exists.
This is it, and the screen is mostly in, apart from the big hole in the middle, which is where the proscenium, as we call it. And all the speakers that you saw earlier, you know, are behind the top, you know, just above the proscenium. There's a huge chunk there. And this is the mock-up again. Just seeing this sort of mini stage, and we started to look at things. And this was interesting, which anyone that's seen the show will know this moment. Where there's two ways of, in the same way that Niall talks about 3D sound. The video surface, the spherical surface, you can either think of it as a flat surface that you map onto, or you can think of it as a portal to another world. And what we found, what Willie's team found, and Tamasha and all the guys, is that if you map a cube onto a sphere, the room changes shape. And it's mind-blowing, especially if you're in the right sweet spot. If you're not in the sweet spot, it's just a distorted cube. But it was kind of a moment we were all like, oh my God, like the walls just changed. And then we turned it into a cylinder with this sort of ending, you know, this long tunnel. And that was a real amazing moment to think about the space beyond the sphere. It's not just a video surface like a screen. It's like a big VR headset almost.
You really lose a grasp on, you know, how big the sphere is as an audience member begins to morph entirely. So this is the exosphere, right?
This is another sphere they have. This is like 1 to 100 or something. I don't know what the scale is on this one. This is in the foyer of the 25% sphere. And this is their exosphere. So not only is there a big screen on the inside, they also have a whole screen on the outside made up of LED pucks, a bit like we did on Pop Art years ago. So that they're much more spread out. But we also, because we were designing the stage, or because we were designing the record player, we did the logo, and then we wanted the sphere to look like that. This is the first pictures of the testing of your first build. This was the first time they switched on the exosphere, which is in July, and they did it, was it July 4th? Yeah. And then we put our content on the outside, and everyone was like, oh wow, you two are coming, and it was on, and it works. This is VR. So we were checking all the content in VR back in London. So this is the virtual model, so that we could see how it would feel as we were developing it in England. All over the world, everyone had their headsets, and they were sort of checking.
So we're still mapping here. We're still
mapping.
very much the
And then
world
this was what I was talking about before. So this is our mock stage in France, where we mocked it all up. We built out scaffolding, and while that's happening in August, Asha's in Vegas dealing with this. And this is us testing. If you just go back one picture, you see that string. This was the string, us testing the string for the first time. So literally, we're trying that out in Vegas, but I'm hanging a rope in that little room in France and off Bono's tree to see how he interacts with this piece of rope. So
that machinery on the bottom, you have to realize that they were trying to do another show in there. So a week after we opened, they were opening Postcards from Earth, from the Darren Aronofsky movie. So we had to split the time. So I was battling this monster, and they were battling their own monster, you know, because I was using my system. That was one of the challenges that I was asked, like, can we do this? And I'm like, okay. Their business model was, hey, let's do this movie. So some of the equipment that was brought in that they developed was not necessarily what we were going to use to deploy the rock show. And that was, a few months of headaches and and lots of money later, you know, that's that we deployed our own system. So whatever was driving that screen was all YouTube stuff. Like there was a company called The Sky's involved, many companies were involved, Fuse, and we day and night we were in there. I walked in there at the end of June, and I just left it last week. 23, yeah.
It's worth just pointing out to Smash's point that whilst people think of it as a residency, we had to move the stage out every day because they play the movie every day that there isn't U2. So the stage was designed, the lampposts and everything were all designed to be rolled. You know, they used to pull the seats back underneath the underhang, and then they would hold the stage out of the way so that they could do the film. And this is looking down from the catwalks. You know, we talked earlier about the hatches. So all of the hatches in the screen from that previous picture, you can sort of see the mechanics of the catwalks and everything above the sphere, which is kind of wild.
So we're getting very close to rehearsal. We've built the room.
Built the room.
And when did rehearsals officially start?
September the 1st.
A bit later, was a week later. It's like when the band walked in there and we were kind of ready to show them all this stuff. But you know, it's audio, it's lighting, because you know we brought in a whole package ourselves. It's the stage, and it's for the first time you actually see this whole orchestra together with all the whistles and bells. Was like, you know, 3 weeks before the first show. It's frightening.
And there's things that you don't predict. If you go back those 3 pictures, it's a really interesting thing that, one more. So, at no point did any of us ever think that when there was a light on in the sphere somewhere, it would make the facets of the screen really visible. And so, you know, just the light emitted from the sphere itself, forget you before you even switch the theatrical light on, lights up the sphere. And so it's a thing that we just had never really thought about. And so then we had to like take that and either use it as a pro or a con, you know, to the things, which is always fun when these things come at you late in the day.
Many curveballs are caught in the sphere, I imagine. And the show features work by Irish artist John Gerard. Could you speak to the choice to integrate John Gerard's work?
Sure. I mean, the previous picture is a piece that he's made a few years ago called Western Flag, which is a CG game engine generated flag made out of smoke, and this black smoke is denoting the sort of beginning of the oil drilling in Texas. And in geospace, the digital geospace, I guess, this flag is positioned, and this artwork that is a screen that he puts up in different places, but it's looking at a live artwork that changes through day and night, and wind, and you know, everything. And so this was the first of 3 artworks that he's done like this. But Bono, and it's very famous, you know, thought that this was one of the most significant pieces of art of this generation. And just so it turns out that John Gerard is also Irish and used to work in the restaurant that Bono's brother owned. So it's like a really weird thing when we were sat around the table in France on our first day, and we're meeting John, and he's like, oh yeah, I used to work in the thing, and they're like, oh, where's so and so? It's like, oh yeah. So it's this really weird thing, but he's amazing, and so he did this, and then the second one he did was Flare, which is once the oceans have heated from all of the oil, this is positioned in the Pacific Ocean. And so we use this in the end of the world. And then he actually made this one, which is the white steam flag of surrender, which he made for U2 as the sort of final bit. We don't use the black flag in the show, but we do use the other 2. That's sort of showing how it looks within the show. So
it's September, so we're world building still. What date was opening night?
29th.
Boom. So we're in the venue, the show is up. What does the live show look like for you guys? What are you each doing during the show?
Well, I left. My job was done. I went to another show.
Well, I'm backstage because there's also a very large monitor system. So, you know, with a good amount of RF, 86 channels of RF, and in Vegas trying to control that can be fun as well. So I haven't actually seen a show. You know, I've seen clips of it, but I haven't actually seen a show. I've seen some rehearsals and go up on stage, but during the show, I'm actually physically backstage, keeping an eye on everything, making sure we've got 3 engineers backstage and 4 recording systems, and they have to be looked at. You know, kept running, and hopefully, if there is a problem, you'll catch it before it becomes a big problem. You know, so that's what I do during the show.
I'm actually I'm not only technically putting it all together, you know, most of the video gear, I'm also switching the cameras live.
See your thing just in the corner there.
Yeah.
That little screen is Smash's screen.
So I am in front of the whole, because you have to see it. You know, my son was triggering all the visuals, but I'm like working with him closely to where we do all the iMac. It's called, it's where, you know, the guys come up, and we have I had 10 cameras spread around the venue, all robotic. There's some cool robots there that just twist around the edge while he was doing a solo in mysterious ways. So I'm directing cameras, and that's the fun bit, really. I mean, doing the actual shows is just in control of, you know, this thing is really fun. Yeah.
Living, breathing monster of a sphere. So the show opens on the 29th of September, and it closed on the 3rd of March 2024. I can't believe that we're nearing the end of this panel. I still feel like I have a million questions to ask you. But what do you now know that you did not know when you entered the sphere?
Well, for me, when you're on site, you learn an awful lot more. You can anticipate everything and think about everything and have theories about how it will work, but when you're actually there is when you really know. It's only when everything that can break is broken do you know what will work, you know? And one of the things that halfway during rehearsals is because the PA system is so well processed and so data heavy that there was quite a bit of latency. So normal stages are positioned behind the PA, but this is positioned in front of the PA. So any acoustic sound coming from the stage will come to the front couple of rows faster than they will hear the PA. So there's a delay, there's an echo, or you know, a latency. So we had to deal with that. And we were very lucky in so much as there was no guitar amps or bass amps on stage, or floor wedges. So it was really only the drums we had to look after. So we had to cover the drums or disguise them behind a plastic screen, so they were baffled away from what people would hear. That was something we kind of knew could happen, but we didn't realize how bad it would happen. So that was the main thing, really. We felt it was a little bit, we had to, because everything was running on Dante, which is a very small cable. We were used to, you know, big heavy multi-core cables, which are basically indestructible. So when we were running everything on Dante, we had to look at using the best cable possible and also making sure that the environment that that piece of equipment was in wouldn't shake because of sub bass, or, you know, there was a few physical things we had to look at, which we would have not thought of as much as we should have beforehand, but we did learn very quickly how to prevent anything happening, you know.
It's fascinating. And Smash, what's your big learning and your big takeaway?
I don't know.
Not just technical, creative, philosophical, anything.
Would I do it again? Yes, probably. Because I'm just that mad. But if they'd build one twice as big, yeah, I'd probably be involved with it. I'd probably say no first, but yeah, that feeling of that first show, it's something. When that thing goes off and the last song starts to play, and you're like, I'm sobbing by then, like I'm seriously in tears because you're so tired and your adrenaline just you fall down like a lead balloon. You know, you've been working on a thing for over a year or something, and to see that first show, that's a feeling that they can't take away. Like, that is spectacular, and that's what I remember of that. You know, it's and now I'm on to the next one. God knows what the future brings, and yeah, I'm going to Hawaii next week. So
Well, we love that for you. Cedric, what about you?
Well, it's an interesting one because obviously as a set designer, fundamentally I want to design sets, and the set here was actually relatively small. The stage is quite clever. It has the backline guys underneath and air conditioning to keep the guitars from going out of tune, and a whole lot of things that no one would ever think about. But I think as an experience of a building that is looking towards what is the next thing, and you know, what is the future of entertainment, and how do venues like this allow us to experience the digital world more than maybe a traditional arena. I felt that this show sort of started to tell us how that could be, and I think, you know, whilst a VR experience is a really great, or an AR experience is a really great singular experience, there's nothing like being in a room with all these people who are all experiencing this thing at the same time. And when that first concrete screen cracked open on the first night, people literally, you know, they were just and they really thought that the building was about to fall over. And, you know, at the very final bit of the show, which is Devlin's Nevada Arc, which is all of the endangered species of Nevada, on the sort of ceiling of this new canvas of this sort of large space. It's kind of amazing, and it just sits like that for like 20 minutes. And that thing, as we said earlier about the screen, being able to sort of just be this invisible world. There's a picture that was like 3 back, which was one of Bono's most exciting ideas, which was we wanted to take the wall away and see Vegas. And this idea that a venue can disappear, you know, that you build this multi-billion dollar venue, but you actually want it to disappear and just see these other worlds. I think that was really interesting.
It's fascinating, and the show certainly speaks to the necessity of gathering collectively. And thank you all so much for gathering with us here today. Please give it up for our mastermind.